If you are familiar with Christian apologetics, you probably have heard this argument for the resurrection of Jesus. Why would the apostles die for a lie? There were 12 original apostles. According to tradition, almost all of them died as martyrs. If the resurrection of Jesus had been a lie, they wouldn't have been willing to die for it. So it must have been true. But how exactly do we know how the apostles died? It turns out that when you actually look at the evidence, the vast majority of sources are legends that appeared many hundreds of years after the events allegedly took place, some of them even well into the Middle Ages. In most of the cases, what we have is a bunch of dubious and contradictory tales with zero historical credibility. In this video, we will look at each one of the apostles and examine the sources behind the traditional martyrdom claims. So let's start. Philip. What was Philip's fate? Reportedly, he died after being hung upside down with iron hooks through his ankles. However, what source do we have for this? The source for this is Acts of Philip, which is an apocryphal book from the mid to late 4th century. So, from the start, we see that this is really late. We're talking around 400 years after the facts, which is usually considered too late to be reliable. But it gets worse. You want to know what else happens in this book? Well, according to it, Philip cursed his enemies before dying, causing 7,000 people to be suddenly swallowed up by an abyss. In return, Jesus appeared and rebuked Philip for returning evil for evil, and told him that he would be admitted to heaven only after being tortured outside its gates for 40 days as punishment. Yeah, that is some pretty crazy stuff there. But there's more. The book even features a talking leopard and a talking goat that become companions of Philip. I'm not making this up. The whole story obviously screams fiction. So what's the verdict? The verdict is legendary. The New Advent Catholic Encyclopedia calls this work purely legendary and a tissue of fables, and this is obviously what it is. So we are not off to a good start here. Let's see if the next apostle has better sources. Bartholomew. Bartholomew was a friend of Philip. What was his fate? We have conflicting stories. One tradition speaks of him being kidnapped, beaten, and cast into the sea to drown. A different tradition claims he was beheaded in India on the orders of King Astragas, who belonged to a demon-worshipping cult. A third account states that he was crucified upside down, and a fourth one says that he was skinned alive and beheaded in Turkey. So, as you can see, what we have here is a bunch of different stories that appeared here and there, but which completely contradict each other. So, obviously, this is just a bunch of tales that people made up, and there's absolutely no history behind them. This pattern repeats itself for many of the other disciples of Jesus, as you will see later in the video. Verdict? Unreliable. The New Advent Encyclopedia says the manner of his death is uncertain. Simon the Zealot. What was his fate? We have conflicting stories again. Christian Ethiopians claim that he was crucified in Samaria, while Justus Lipsius writes that he was sawn in half in Sunir, Persia. However, Moses of Chorene writes that he was martyred in Iberia, and Eastern tradition says that he died naturally in Edessa. So, once again, we have a bunch of tales that contradict each other, but no reliable historical sources. Verdict: unreliable. The New Advent Encyclopedia says the manner of his death is uncertain and adds that other than his name, nothing further is known of him. Andrew. Andrew was the brother of Peter. What was his fate? Tradition holds that Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross, which is known today as St. Andrew's Cross. What is the source for this? The source is the apocryphal, probably 2nd century book called Acts of Andrew. Like Acts of Philip, this book is full of crazy and highly fantastic miracles. Let's take a look at the Wikipedia page. Like those in the 2 books of Acts on which it appears based, the miracles are extremely supernatural and highly extravagant. For example, aside from the usual miracles of raising the dead, healing the blind, and so forth, he survives being placed amongst fierce animals, calms storms, and defeats armies simply by crossing himself. Andrew causes an embryo which was illegitimate to die, and also rescues a boy from his incestuous mother, an act resulting in her laying false charges against them, requiring God to send an earthquake to free Andrew and the boy. So much does the text venture into the realm of extreme supernatural events that, while being crucified, Andrew's still able to give sermons for 3 days. So yeah, pretty crazy stuff as you can see. What is the verdict? Legendary. Eusebius of Caesarea dismissed the book as heretic and absurd. Professor of New Testament Dennis MacDonald posits the theory that the non-canonical Acts of Andrew was a Christian retelling of Homer's Odyssey. Jude. Jude is also called Judas Thaddeus. What was his fate? We have conflicting stories. It is often said that he went with Simon to preach in Armenia, though New Advent says that this legend is a late development not mentioned by contemporary historians of that region. The Catholic Patron Saints Index says he was clubbed to death. However, the apocryphal Acts of Thaddeus says he died naturally. Another account says he was crucified. Verdict: unreliable. There are no good historical sources confirming his fate. Matthew. Matthew is traditionally known as the author of the Gospel of Matthew. So, other than allegedly writing the Gospel, what was his fate? It is unknown. Catholic.org says it is uncertain whether he died a natural death or received the crown of martyrdom. Another source says there's conflicting information about whether he was martyred in Egypt or in Persia. Sources? One source is called Acts and Martyrdom of St. Matthew, but it is very late. Let's check it out. The Catholic Church attributes Acts and Martyrdom of St. Matthew the Apostle to the Abyssinians. Abyssinia is an old name for Ethiopia, although some early church writers placed it north of Israel. The only location mentioned in the text is Myrna, a city of man-eaters. The church assigns a date of 550 AD to the document. It describes Matthew's staff turning into a magical tree and the conversion of the local king Fulvanus and his family to Christianity. It also supplies one of several conflicting stories regarding the martyrdom of the Apostle Matthew. This is very late and sounds a lot like a legend to me, so it is not a good source. What is the verdict? Legendary. The Christian History Institute says, "We have nothing but legend about Matthew's death." James, son of Zebedee. According to the New Testament, James was the first apostle to die as a martyr. What was his fate? King Herod Agrippa had him killed with a sword. This is recorded in the Bible. What is the source for this exactly? The source is the book of Acts, specifically Acts chapter 12, verse 2. The question is, do scholars consider Acts to be historical? Some of them do, but others don't. This chapter in particular has a big issue. After reporting the death of James, the book describes a highly fantastical and implausible event. It reports Peter getting captured and being rescued by an angel. Let's check it out. But while Peter was in prison, the church prayed very earnestly for him. The night before Peter was to be placed on trial, he was asleep, fastened with 2 chains between 2 soldiers. Other guards stood at the prison gate. Suddenly, there was a bright light in the cell, and an angel of the Lord stood before Peter. The angel struck him on the side to awaken him and said, "Quick, get up!" And the chains fell off his wrists. So basically, King Herod captured Peter and placed him under the watch of 16 soldiers, but an angel just appeared at night and broke him out. Are we really supposed to believe that something like this happened and nobody else reported anything about it? Even if we grant that the angel was invisible to the soldiers, which Acts does not say, it feels like somebody should have written something about such a mysterious escape. Apologists could claim that Peter was not important enough for this to be recorded, but the fact that Herod had 16 men guarding him proves otherwise. I think the entire event is just too implausible to be true, and it casts doubts on the entire chapter. So, what is the verdict then? I'm going to say, not great. There's this implausible angelic rescue scene, and there's also the known issue of Acts wanting to exaggerate the persecution endured by Christians back then, which has also been pointed out by some scholars. Okay now, so far, we have around half of the apostles, and what we have for their martyrdom claims is mostly really bad sources. I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm going to leave the rest of the disciples for the second part of this video. Spoiler alert, the rest of the sources are not much better. This video was based on a post by atheist author Adam Lee on his blog, Daylight Atheism. There's a link in the description. Check it out. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.